Everybody knows Elvis Presley, but did you know that Elvis had a twin, or that his controversial manager may have committed murder? Keep watching for everything else you need to know about the untold truth of Elvis Presley. Though Elvis Presley would go on to become the king of rock and roll and the best-selling recording artist of all time, his upbringing didn't promise all of that success. The Mississippi native was brought up in humble circumstances and endured a difficult and at times traumatic childhood. The first tragedy of Elvis's life occurred at the time of his birth. According to Peter Gralnick, whose biography Last Train to Memphis, The Rise of Elvis Presley, was published to critical acclaim in 1995, Elvis was raised as an only child, but was in fact a twin. His brother Jesse Garin was stillborn, having been delivered at 4 a.m. on January 8, 1935, around half an hour before Elvis himself. The heartbreaking facts of Jesse's death before Elvis's birth had severe emotional repercussions for the surviving twin. The future superstar would pay repeated visits to his twin brother's unmarked grave throughout his childhood, ruminating on his lost brother at Priceville Cemetery in the Presleys' hometown of Tupelo. As he grew older and became famous, Elvis made no secret of his loss, referring to Jesse frequently in interviews, while Elvis's mother Gladys reportedly comforted herself with the belief that Elvis's incredible success had come in part from inheriting the strength of his brother Jesse. For many, the story of Elvis Presley's rise is emblematic of the American dream, but in the early years of his childhood, it looked highly unlikely that he would find success, as financial difficulties saw his poor family struggling to survive. Elvis was born in the middle of the Great Depression, and the Presley family felt the full force of the severe economic downturn. While the maternal side of Elvis's family was closely associated with the church, his father, Vernon, who described himself as a common laborer, took on a variety of small jobs to make ends meet, meaning that young Elvis had an unsettled life. The most troubling moment of Elvis's early years occurred in 1937, when Vernon was sentenced to 3 years in jail, along with Gladys's brother Travis and a family friend, for forging and attempting to cash a $4 check. There was no evidence that Vernon and his accomplices were habitual criminals, and one neighbor told Peter Gralnick that they believed that the men had been made an example of. Sadly, the incident simply demonstrates the severe financial difficulties so many American families like the Presleys were experiencing at the time. Though Vernon was released after 8 months, the Presleys lost their home while he was away, meaning Gladys and young Elvis had to rely on family and friends for food and shelter. It may sound absurd to suggest that the most successful musician in the history of rock and roll was a musical failure, but this is how his talent was considered in his early years, or at least when it came to the opinion of his teachers and peers. Elvis Presley was an unusual school student, with a persona far removed from that which would emerge as his musical career unfolded. His family had recently relocated from Tupelo to Memphis in yet another upheaval. Elvis was an outsider who made little impression on those around him in his first years at the city's Humes High School. It was through music that Elvis would eventually find his identity, playing guitar at break times and during lunch hour for his fellow students, who were said to care little for his music. Even Elvis's 8th grade music teacher, Miss Marmon, allegedly told Elvis that he had no talent as a singer.
I went to Humes High School in Memphis. I was taking music. I flunked music just flat. Whew. F. Only thing I ever failed.
In response, the future king brought his guitar to class and performed a version of Fairleigh Holden's Keep Them Cold Icy Fingers Off of Me, leading Marmon to admit she had little aptitude for assessing the merits of rock and roll. After graduating from school at the age of 18 in 1953, Elvis Presley, who had taken on a series of odd jobs throughout his teens, became a truck driver. He seemed, like his father, to be on the path to a life of hard labor. However, 1953 was also the year that Elvis's life changed unexpectedly thanks to a single recording made for an audience of one. The official story of Elvis's first record goes that on July 18, 1953, the future superstar walked into the studios of the Memphis Recording Service, operated by Sun Records. He planned to cut an acetate as a gift for his mother Gladys, who had bought him his first guitar way back on his 11th birthday. The recording, with My Happiness on one side and That's When Your Heartaches Begin on the other, cost $4. And though his mother reportedly never even heard the recording for herself, as the Presley family didn't own a record player at the time, the session had a profound impact on Elvis's life, as it caught the attention of Sun Records boss Sam Phillips. The producer retained Elvis to record further songs for the label. Elvis's first recording has never been publicly released, but in 2014, the acetate was the star lot at a Graceland auction when it sold for an eye-popping $300,000. In the years following his first recordings for Sun Records, Elvis Presley carved out a musical identity through a string of singles released under the guidance of label boss Sam Phillips. But the song that changed everything for Elvis was Heartbreak Hotel. It was the first single he released after signing to the major Nashville label RCA Victor in 1956. The The song would become Elvis's first million seller and make him a household name overnight. The song was introduced to Elvis by co-writer Mae Bourne Axton, whose inspiration for it has long been believed to have been a suicide note published in a local paper reading, "I walk a lonely street," which became the song's memorable refrain.
Don't mind if they think I've only written the one, because it's a classic.
However, recent research has uncovered the news story Axton and her co-writer Tommy Durden had almost certainly been inspired by. It was the tale of Alvin Kralik, a young artist who turned to crime in the aftermath of a heartbreaking divorce. Though guilt led Kralik to hand himself in to police after a spate of robberies, he eventually returned to crime and was shot to death attempting to hold up a liquor store. The famous line was quoted as deriving from Kralik's unpublished autobiography. Future pop star Elton John recalled Elvis's breakthrough hit, saying of the song, "I changed my life. Elvis Presley changed everyone's life. I mean, there would be no Beatles, there would be no Hendrix, there would be no Dylan." It is unlikely that anyone viewing Elvis Presley's iconic January 1957 performance on The Ed Sullivan Show today would guess that it had in any way been censored. In the footage, the by now established musical sensation gave a charismatic performance of some of his biggest hits to that point, culminating in a soulful rendition of the gospel song Peace in the Valley. The session ended with Sullivan making a sincere declaration about Elvis.
I wanted to say to Elvis Presley and the country that this is a real, decent, fine boy.
Then he wished Elvis's future career in music and movies all the success in the world. However, the story behind Elvis's first big national television appearances is far more checkered than that last appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show might suggest. In fact, the performance was censored, inasmuch as the 21-year-old superstar was only filmed from the waist up. The decision to film Presley in such a way had been prompted by Sullivan's producers' concerns over Elvis's divisiveness among older audiences. Elvis had previously performed on The Steve Allen Show and The Milton Berle Show, and had outraged audiences with his pelvis gyrating and rubber leg dance moves. For his first two appearances on Sullivan, Elvis's performance was toned down, but still managed to attract a total of 70,000 complaints from audience members concerned that his moves could corrupt America's youth. Elvis Presley's early career was given a boost thanks to the involvement of a man named Colonel Tom Parker. Parker was a seemingly all-American talent manager from West Virginia who had made his name resurrecting the careers of various singers from the 1930s and 1940s. His title of Colonel was bestowed on him by Governor Jimmy Davis of Louisiana after Parker helped him campaign for governor. But despite his apparent respectability, Parker, who would later gain a reputation as a vicious businessman and ruthless negotiator, was hiding a secret. According to Alana Nash, author of The Colonel, The Extraordinary Story of Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis Presley, Parker wasn't from the U.S. at all. He was an illegal immigrant who had stowed away to America in his early adulthood and took on Parker as an assumed name. He was born Andreas Cornelis van Kook and had come to America from his native Holland. It's a well-known fact that Elvis only ever performed to North American audiences, and apart from 3 shows in Canada, only ever in the United States. The US is, of course, a big music market, and easily lucrative enough to sustain the career of an artist of Elvis's caliber. But there is the big question of why he never toured abroad. Allegedly, the reason for this lack of international performances was Colonel Tom Parker. According to the biographer Alana Nash, Parker was afraid that if he traveled abroad with Elvis, his status as an illegal U.S. resident might be revealed. Why Parker would be so cautious about his true identity has puzzled historians. After Parker served in the U.S. Army, he had the opportunity to have his illegal immigrant status quashed and become naturalized. But as Nash notes, some believe that Elvis's manager may have been involved in the murder of a Dutch woman. That crime may have prompted his sudden emigration from Holland. It has been postulated that Parker may have feared the Netherlands' extradition deal with the United States and was trying to remain under the radar. If extradited, he would have been brought back to his native country and interviewed over the killing. But while the biographer floated this theory, no investigation has ever brought to light concrete evidence suggesting his involvement in any such crime. By 1957, Elvis was already starring in his third movie, Jailhouse Rock, which some fans believe is the rock and roller's best. Fans have a soft spot for the movie thanks to Elvis, who plays a prison inmate who is behind bars for manslaughter following a bar brawl. In the film, he inhabits a raw and rugged rebellious archetype. Rebellion was an aspect of Elvis's early persona which was toned down over time due to Colonel Tom Parker's intentional watering down of the Elvis brand. It was done so that he might be palatable to the widest possible audiences. Much of the movie's longevity is owed to its riotous title song, the performance of which is as fun on screen as it is catchy on record. But the concept of a Jailhouse Rock party wasn't exactly new. Many critics argue that Jailhouse Rock was pretty much a feature-length version of the song Rock Around the Rock Pile. It's a song that describes prisoners jiving to rock and roll, which had appeared in the influential musical The Girl Can't Help It the previous year. Not that anyone who saw Jailhouse Rock seemed to care. But to Elvis's credit, later on, when he encountered rockers such as Gene Vincent, who had been heavily influenced by his style, the king was reportedly gracious and took imitation as flattery rather than theft. In 1958, Elvis was drafted into the U.S. Army and was stationed in Germany for 2 years. The experience was reportedly transformational and had an enormous impact on Elvis's career and public persona. But Elvis's time in Germany was also significant on a personal level. It was during these years that he would meet the girl who would go on to be his wife. The strange thing is, she was only 14 at the time, while Elvis, one of the most famous people on the planet, was 24. Priscilla was the daughter of an Air Force serviceman who had been transferred to the same German base as Elvis. She spent her time on base playing with her younger brother until a friend of Elvis inquired if she was a fan of his music and whether she would like to meet him. The strangeness of their courtship was also complicated by the fact that Elvis's beloved mother, Gladys, had just recently died, and the musician reportedly saw an uncanny resemblance between his mother and the 14-year-old Priscilla.
Elvis walked over to me and he said, "Oh, what do we have here?"
As Priscilla revealed in a 1985 People magazine article that after meeting her parents, the two began a long courtship of nightly meetings, private talks, and passionate kissing. She wrote, "Something in his southern upbringing had taught him that the right girl was to be saved for marriage. I was that girl." The pair eventually married in 1967 and had a daughter together, Lisa Marie, before divorcing in 1972. As well as his future wife Priscilla, there was another obsession that the king of rock and roll would encounter during his years in the U.S. Army: martial arts. This would become one of the key passions of his life outside of music, especially karate.
What do you do for relaxation? You said you study
Karate. If you can relax doing this, I don't know.
Elvis began training with a German karate expert Jürgen Seidel at his off-base home in Nauheim in 1958. And his dedication to the arts is shown by the fact that within months of his return to Memphis in 1960, he was bestowed with his first black belt by local trainer Hank Slamansky. He later trained with Master Kong Rhee, who would remain his karate teacher into the 1970s. Elvis was so enamored with karate that he even opened a dojo, the Tennessee Karate Institute, in 1974. Though considered by many outside observers something of an eccentricity in the Elvis Presley story, the musician's intense dedication to the arts has been highlighted by martial arts publications such as Black Belt magazine as unusually pioneering. The magazine noted that rather than him simply being a celebrity practitioner, attaining the level of a black belt in 1960 was notable as he was one of perhaps only 100 Americans to hold a black belt in karate at the time. By 1974, Elvis was honored with an 8th degree karate black belt, signaling his incredibly high level of skill and dedication. Elvis Presley seemed to have a real affinity with martial arts, and he was reportedly more than happy to use his passion to impress. As noted by Black Belt magazine, Elvis made use of martial arts in many of his movies, being one of the very first actors to do so before the arrival of Bruce Lee cemented karate as an on-screen staple. Behind closed doors, Elvis also used karate to impress his friends and acquaintances, leading to some extraordinary encounters with his fellow celebrities. While hosting the British pop music panel show Nevermind the Buzzcocks in 2011, veteran shock rocker Alice Cooper recalled meeting Elvis in 1970. According to Cooper, he was invited to meet Elvis at his hotel room in an improbable quartet alongside Liza Minnelli, Linda Lovelace, and Chubby Checker. Cooper was thrilled to meet Elvis, while Elvis reportedly told Cooper that he was a fan of his stage act, which at the time involved a live snake coiled around his neck. Then things started to get weird. According to Cooper, though they had all been checked for weapons before they entered the hotel room, Elvis proceeded to reach into a drawer and pull out what Cooper describes as a loaded snub-nosed .38 pistol. Elvis handed the weapon to Cooper, telling him that he would then demonstrate how to disarm someone with a gun. Cooper joked that he began having intrusive thoughts about being the man who shot Elvis Presley, but that before he could act, he was on his back on the floor, with Elvis standing over him, gun in hand.
Before I could decide what to do, I was on the floor, and he's had his boot in my throat. I'm going, it's good, Elvis.
Graceland, Elvis Presley's sprawling Memphis home, is an integral part of his legend and is today a place of pilgrimage for Elvis devotees. In addition to the opulence of the estate itself, Graceland was notable as the home of the many animals the Presleys kept throughout Elvis's lifetime. The official Graceland website states that the singer bought the property and a surrounding 13.8 acres of surrounding land in 1957, shortly after his big national breakthrough and the success of some of his most prominent music and movies. The Presley menagerie started with typical farm animals. Elvis's mother, Gladys, reportedly kept several chickens on the land. His father, Vernon, kept hogs, and Graceland was also the home of several donkeys. A turkey named Bowtie was reportedly the singer's beloved pet, while the Presleys also bought horses and ponies, one of which was given to Elvis's daughter, Lisa Marie. The king also had several dogs. but soon the menagerie grew more exotic. In 1961, Elvis bought a chimpanzee, and in 1966 was gifted a spider monkey, both of which lived at Graceland. Other animals, however, were reportedly given to the Memphis Zoo, including 2 wallabies that had been sent to Elvis by Australian fans on learning that the king was an animal lover. It is commonly held that Elvis Presley was devoted to his music and generally good to his fans, especially in his early years. But in 1974, one cynical release revealed that not all was well with Elvis and his team, and led to the King's name being on the front of what has been called by many critics the very worst album of all time. As biographer Alana Nash explains, in 1974, Elvis's longtime manager Colonel Tom Parker was attempting to establish a new company with Elvis's father, Boxcar Enterprises. Through this company, he was attempting to manage Elvis's commercial interests, such as merchandising. The Colonel, however, reportedly skewed the books so that he would receive 10 times the income that Elvis himself received. Parker was also attempting to wrest control of Elvis's recordings from his label RCA Victor. Seemingly testing the waters in terms of what he could release without stepping on the toes of RCA, Boxcar Enterprises released Having Fun with Elvis on Stage, a bizarre talking-only album made up of recorded bits of speech, audience interaction, and humming, taken from Elvis's live recordings which didn't contain any songs. Writing for AllMusic, critic Mark Deming has called the album sheer perversity and likened the experience of listening to a full-on car crash. Elvis's avowed patriotism saw him attempt to preserve U.S. political heritage. In 1964, the musician bought the USS Potomac, the ship famously used by President Franklin D. Roosevelt as a floating White House between 1936 and 1945. Roosevelt thought so highly of the ship that, as well as using it as a place to relax, he also received foreign guests aboard the Potomac, most notably the British royal family in 1939. When the ship seemed destined for the scrap heap, Elvis, with the support of Colonel Tom Parker, attempted to rescue it through the purchase. From there, they attempted to repurpose it as a national shrine that might raise funds for the March of Dimes Foundation. The foundation is a mother and baby charity set up by Roosevelt himself, but maintenance costs meant that the foundation rejected the plan. Following Elvis's ownership, the Potomac was seized by authorities who in 1980 believed that it was involved in drug smuggling. The ship then sank while impounded at San Francisco's Treasure Island, but was eventually raised for restoration and is now operated and preserved by a team of volunteers. There are many myths and legends concerning Elvis Presley's only encounter with the Beatles, whom he met on August 27, 1965, including many accounts that an incredible jam session took place between the 2 acts. However, as noted by the BBC, while the Fab Four were keen to have a meeting with the King, all involved wanted to avoid the event turning into a publicity stunt. This meant that no press were invited and that no photographs or recordings of the event were ever made for posterity. However, Elvis's attitude toward his British counterparts would eventually be revealed years later, with the unsealing of the King's FBI files. In 1970, Elvis delivered a handwritten letter to the White House, requesting an audience with President Richard Nixon. At the meeting, Elvis suggested that he could be a useful ally in the ongoing war on drugs. Most strangely of all, the rock and roll star identified a number of his fellow entertainers as potential security risks, among them the Beatles. For that band in particular, he suggested that they ought to be banned from entering the United States at all. Elvis had grown increasingly concerned about their transformation into hippies in the years since their meeting, and saw their use of an image of Karl Marx on the cover of their album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band as evidence that they were anti-American. Throughout his life, Elvis Presley maintained a rapport with numerous police officers and even entire forces, often donating funds to support policing causes. Graceland reports Memphis patrolman Jim Hammers as stating, "I don't care where he was, whenever he saw the police, Elvis always stopped and talked to them. He would drive up beside them in the street and get them to pull over. He would spend hours at a time talking with them in different places." In one bizarre incident, Elvis also got involved in police work, when after witnessing a traffic collision, he aided officers by directing traffic around the scene of the accident. Seeing Elvis in the middle of an intersection telling motorists where to go was surely a surreal sight for passing drivers. Elvis was also famously a collector of police badges, having first been gifted one by a girl at a skating rink in Memphis in 1957. Elvis collected police badges from wherever he traveled in the United States, and even managed to secure for his collection a badge from the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs during his meeting with President Nixon. However, Priscilla Presley would suggest a more underhanded motive, writing in her 1985 memoir, Elvis and Me. The narc badge represented some kind of ultimate power to him. In Elvis's mind, that badge would give him the right to carry any prescribed drug he had on his person. Priscilla claimed that Elvis believed having the badge would allow him to take drugs overseas, and that his entourage would be able to carry any guns they pleased on their travels. For a long time, the thought that Elvis Presley might still be alive was perhaps the most famous conspiracy theory besides the supposed faking of the Apollo 11 moon landing. When news broke that the king of rock and roll had died on August 16, 1977 at the age of 42 following a heart attack, the news was so shocking that many of his fans seemingly couldn't believe it. In an effort to deny the loss of their hero, fans started casting around for clues that might challenge the official account. On the 40th anniversary of his death, Time published an article exploring the most notable conspiracy theories surrounding Elvis's demise. The article included conspiracies such as that he faked his death to escape the mafia, or that he had entered the witness protection program after aiding the FBI. In the years since his death, belief in such theories has declined. A poll in the mid-1990s suggested that around 11% of Americans were still open to the idea that Elvis is still alive, but this had dropped sharply to 4% by 2000. But whatever we may think of these numbers, Elvis devotees still have reason to rejoice as his fan base is continuing to grow. For CBS News, a 2017 poll revealed that 47% of Americans still count themselves as Elvis fans, the highest figure in more than a quarter of a century. It seems Elvis won't be leaving the building for some time yet. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about music history are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.